So you made a great movie, you put lots of time and effort into shooting it properly and hopefully recording it well on set, and now you want it to sound great. And that all happens in post-production sound. So getting the mix right, the music, the dialogue, and the special effects is so critical to having your movie look and sound great. If you want to be a successful indie filmmaker, you need to know a lot about not just the production of movies, but the business. We are going to tell you the truth and reality of what really happens in the indie film business. Hi everybody, welcome back. Today we're going to talk about the importance of doing a final fantastic sound mix for your film. So my guest today is Dan Blessinger, and his company's called DB Mix, and I'm going to call him a sound designer. That's the term I use. I mean, some people say sound engineer, some people say mixer, but there's more than mixing. The mix comes at the very end when you're going to put all the elements together, but I think it starts with understanding what the elements are and getting them all together. So Dan, welcome to the show. Thanks for coming on. So you tell, I was going to go through it, but can you just tell everybody what elements you work on and prepare to do a final mix for a movie?
Sure. So depending on what our role is on any particular film, if I'm overseeing the entirety of the sound, then I'm overseeing dialogue, sound effects, and the music, and then the final re-record mix.
Well, let's assume you're doing the whole thing. So can you just go through those three elements and just talk about sort of the importance of each thing?
Sure. So if we're doing the post-production on a film, we'll get all the elements that were recorded on set. So we get all the production elements, so all the actor mics, any boom mics that were on the set. And then we're basically going through it and trying to figure out what we can keep and what maybe needs to get fixed and what maybe needs to get replaced. And that's true of dialogue and sound effects as well. So that's the first thing we do. We just sort of make an assessment of what's usable from the initial production. And then once we kind of define that, we split up into teams. So I have a dialogue editor and a sound effects editor. And the dialogue editors will, as quick as possible, try to save as much of the production dialogue as we can, and then identify which pieces need to be replaced with ADR. And then we'll make an ADR list and send that to the director. And our last film, it was Jeff. So we sent that to Jeff and we reviewed those lines and then decided which actors we needed to bring in for ADR. Once we have a clean dialogue track, then we start building the effects around that. Actually, they're going simultaneously. There's another editor working on sound effects. And we're doing the same. We're trying to farm as much of the recorded footsteps and door shuts and different things that are going to make the film sound more real, and try to use those and farm those and put those into our template. And then whatever is not usable or missing or doesn't sound so great because a truck drove by in a certain scene, we'll just build those and we'll design those scenes sound effects wise. So those two are kind of going concurrently. And then once that's together, usually we start to get music from the composer. That really helps us understand how much the music's going to cover certain scenes. Otherwise, we have to really fill them with a lot of detailed sound effects. We try to do that anyway, but depending on how much time we have, we'll sort of dictate, how particular we can get with sound design detail. So once we get the music, then we have all the elements, then we do the mix. We do the re-record mix. And that's the fun part, when you really start to see the film come together and you can start getting into the real detail of weaving the music, sound effects, and dialogue together.
So for those people who don't understand this process in detail, the mix is bringing all of those three elements together: dialogue, sound effects, and music, and balancing them in a way that tells the story best. So in some scenes, you might bring up the music tracks. In some scenes, you might bring up the dialogue tracks. It helps with the storytelling. And the sound effect, some scenes actually the sound effects are front and center, but usually, in the films I shoot, the dramas, they're not. Big action films, they might be. Let's just go back to dialogue for a second. I am not a huge fan of ADR, which is that alternative dialogue replacement, or is that what it is exactly?
Yeah, dialogue replacement, that's right.
Okay. The reason I'm not a big fan of it is because I never feel like it matches perfectly. What's your take on that?
Yeah, well, I wouldn't consider myself an expert dialogue editor by any stretch, but there are some incredible tools now that help match it as much as possible. But it is a tedious process, and most directors try to avoid it because it's expensive. You have to get actors back in, and sometimes that's difficult. They might be out of town shooting another film or whatever. So it can be tricky, but I'm with you on that. It's really sort of used as a last resort. Now, if you have an unlimited budget on your film, then you can just spend days and days and days, replacing dialogue and getting it just perfect so you can't really tell that, so they can make it match pretty well. If you have a short schedule or a low budget, you have to find a way to make it work. And but yeah, we generally fight pretty hard to keep the original recorded takes just because it's easier for us to make it real. Yeah, I share your opinion. There just some times where the actor might hit their shirt and the loud mic's hidden in there, or they might, do some gesture and you get this big loud thump or some scratchy sound on the mic that you just can't get rid of. And in that case, you hope you have a good take on the boom mic or even the adjacent actor's mic, and you just try to make it work as best you can. But there are some cases where in our film that we just worked on, there was a scene where the actors were on the beach and there were waves crashing and people driving by, and there's so much extra noise. It was really hard to get a good, clean dialogue take in that moment. So we had to replace a few things. And so in those cases, you just have to, and you do the best you can with the
Yeah, I
tools.
mean, I think you guys as sound engineers do a good job in recording it and getting the levels and everything like that. I think it's just difficult for an actor to find the same emotional sort of tempo that they had on the set when they were doing the scene. I mean, a real well-trained actor
Sure.
can do it, but it's tricky because you're not in the moment. It's after the fact. You're looking at a screen. You're trying to get the pacing right, but it's the emotion. That's where I find it lacks a little bit sometimes.
Well, I would say that's why a really good location sound engineer is worth their weight in gold, because I think that their relationship with the director is really important, because the director is keying in on that emotional performance and trying to get that best take. But if it's not usable, the location sound person has to say, we need another one. And there has to be a trust there between the director and the sound recordist on the session or on the set.
I agree. I agree. So let's just talk about sound effects. So, otherwise known as Foley, or is Foley different? I mean, Foley is when you sort of create sound effects, right? You guys dissect the movie. I mean, you're looking sometimes at things that nobody's looking at. I'll give you an example, okay? Two people are sitting and having a meal together. Everybody always takes for granted that there's sounds of the cutlery, there's sounds of the eating, there's sounds of, things going on, like there might be a clock in the back. There's all these sounds, and you guys have to look at the whole scene and look at every single element to recreate what is happening in that scene. So can you just talk? Sometimes you can use a library, sometimes you have to record.
Yeah, and I tend to Foley more than I use a library, only because there's an art to that as well, and there's a realness to it. I'm sure there are sound effects editors out there that have vast libraries that they know intimately, and they can just, that's the sound of a fork on a hard plate in a large room, or and they know how to manipulate that really well. I find it almost faster to just Foley things because you're responding.
Can you Dan, just take a minute to explain Foley to people who have never seen a Foley studio?
Yeah. So, well, let me back up and I'll say, so we do use some library and some Foley. And I would say we probably do 80% Foley, 20% library. I just think it's faster and more real. A Foley stage, a really good one, will have several pits with different textures like sand or concrete or grassy kinds of things. So when you're doing the footsteps and you're reenacting the footsteps, you have these different, they're like little, 4x8, pits. So different textures for floors. A really good Foley artist will have a bunch of different types of shoes that they can use in those different textures to really make it match what's happening on scene. And it's usually a fairly big room. So if you did it in a small little boxy room, you would hear that. Usually a big stage or a large size room. And then there are all kinds of props that a good Foley artist will have just shelves and shelves of things that are their go-to items that recreate certain sounds. So, for example, a classic bone-breaking sound is like a stalk of celery or something like that. So they're going to have, oh, this is my bone-breaking sound, and this is my physical punching sound. And it might be, in the old days, they used to use like a steak and pound, they would hit the steak piece of meat. But there's other things and other techniques that really great Foley people use, and they will have just huge number of these little toys and props that are kind of their go-tos for. We have some, but we're certainly not, like the big boys would have a big stage with.
Yeah, I've been in Foley stages where there's way more props than a prop department would have. I mean, it's
Right.
and it's all over
Yeah,
the
exactly.
place. Everything from lamps to baseball mitts to everything you can imagine. Yeah, and
Exactly.
It's funny. You think that's the prop department of a studio, but it's actually the Foley stage.
Well, just like we did a film, I think you saw the film, but there was a character in this film who wore like a military camo suit.
Right.
It was like grassy suit, and we had to get every movement that this character made, and like, what are we going to do for that? And I found a pom pom from my kids' high school football game. They were giving out to the parents. I'm like, okay, so we get a pom pom and we sort of push it into our hand, and it sounded just like what you're seeing on the screen. So sometimes what it takes to create that sound is not what you think. You can use a stalk of celery or a pom pom or something that actually matches really well what you see on screen. It's very artistic and fun.
Yeah, it certainly is. It's really like just what you described, like what would sound like you're seeing. It's perception, right? I mean, it's not the reality because you're using it's just a perception of
That's
it.
right.
Right? Now, music, we had a session, actually, Jim did a session with us about the importance of, really good, solid, passionate music. So let's just jump right to the mix. So when you're doing a mix, you're looking, I mean, often the director's sitting with you. I mean, I sat with you during our mix. Well, I came in after you did the first run, and then I came in after and said, okay, let's try this, try this. What are you looking for? Are you looking for the passion in the scene, the excitement? I mean, when I spoke to our cinematographer and the editor, I talked about capturing the essence of a scene. Is that what the mix is all about? What is it?
Well, I think so, because our first film together, I was trying to understand what was important to you as a director. And clearly it was a dialogue-driven film. And so I knew that, we had these very kind of long dialogue scenes that some of them weren't scored. So I was like, oh boy, we're going to have to really create a mood and a realism in that dining room scene with the forks and the plates and that kind of stuff.
Right.
So I knew we were going to have our work cut out for us, filling up those scenes because there was no music to hide behind and so on. But to answer your question, I'm trying to get in your head as the director and understand what you're trying to say in any given scene or the overall message of the film or where you want to take it. And then make decisions based on that, because not everybody's the same. Whether I'm working with a composer or a music person or a film director, I find it much more efficient if I can really understand what's important to you. Because what's important to you might not be that important to the other
Right.
director that I just worked with. I think our first spotting session where I was just taking really good notes of Jeff pointed this out. And so let's really focus on that. And he told me kind of what he was going for in this scene. Let's design it in a way that is, going to realize that vision. So in the context of a mix, I'm really trying to help with the storytelling as much as I can. And I think that if you make bad decisions in a mix, it takes people out of
the moment.
out of the
Yeah,
story.
it does. Yeah.
It takes the audience out of the moment, and they're thinking, why can't I hear the dialogue? Or what was that weird sound? Or why is the music so loud here? Or whatever. I just want to draw the viewer, listener into your vision as the director, not be a distraction. Once I could kind of get it to that point, that's sort of like I use the analogy of sanding a piece of wood. You're doing various levels of sandpaper. The first level is a very coarse sanding where you're getting all the burrs and knots out of it. And then you use a different grade of sandpaper and you do a little finer finish until you get it down to the fine tuning. And at that point, I'm trying to maximize the story in that moment. It could be an emotional scene. If it's a heartwarming scene where the music is very epic, and we'll just push the music and draw you in. If it's a action scene, it's probably going to be more sound effects driven. We're going to push whatever we can to maximize the emotional story or feel in that moment.
How did you become a sound designer? Like what was your journey?
Well, I would say my main background is as a music producer and music mixer. So I started in a studio called Martin Sound in Alhambra, and I worked my way up from runner to chief engineer over several years. But we were doing small orchestras for episodic television. So we were doing Lost and Seventh Heaven, and we were doing various animated shows and some HBO movies. And it's usually 30, 40-piece orchestra kinds of things. And so I really cut my teeth as a music engineer and producer. And so I started, I would have composers who would hire me to record and mix their musical score. And I would meet the director of the film and they'd say, well, would you just mix the film? And it started as mixing documentaries. And then it kind of grew into, okay, well, we need to dialogue edit this a bit and clean that up. And so we started doing dialogue editing, my team and I. And then I was working on the Tom and Jerry cartoon. Jib Covell and I were teaming up, and another composer named Vivek Madala. We were doing the music and we got asked to do the sound effects. And that was really where my team sort of cut its teeth in animation. So we started doing all the animation sound effects. It's really fun and a hoot. And eventually I started just mixing those shows, and I mixed a few features for Warner. And then it kind of grew from there, honestly. But I came into it from the music side. And I think one notable story was, as a music mixer, the joke in the music mix was always, oh gosh, you're gonna be buried under the dialogue and sound effects. So why try so hard to mix the music perfectly? And we were artists, so we were trying to make the music sound amazing. And then we'd go see it in the theater, or we'd see it on TV and go, man, those guys, those blasted, re-recording mixers, they buried our music. How dare they? And it wasn't until I started doing the re-recording mix that I realized, oh man, all these years I've been cursing their name, and now I'm one of them, and I'm turning the music down because I can't hear the dialogue.
Find the right balance.
And so that really changed my perspective once I started doing re-record mix. And same with sound design. I would say that I love working with my team of sound designers and with a composer, because if you have a good relationship with the composer, you're really working together. And like after we did the spotting session with you on the last film, I immediately called Jim, the composer, and said, okay, I'm going to stay out of your way on this. You do this, and I'll just do some background effects and things, and let's let the music really carry this. I won't compete with you. And likewise, he would call me and say, what are you thinking for this? And I'd say, well, we could fill it up and we could really make it a full sound palette. And maybe you just score it with just cello and low strings, and that way we'll kind of stay out of each other's way. And I think those conversations really save you a lot of time and trouble if you're lucky enough to have that kind of working relationship. But I think it's really, you're all on the same team, and ultimately we want to see the director's vision really be fulfilled. And so we're trying to find the most creative and efficient ways of getting there.
Right. So can you dispel a myth for me? I mean, you're sitting in your nice soundstage, which I've been in, obviously. That's where we did the mix for our last film.
I'm actually in my home studio right now.
Oh, you are? Okay. All right. It looks similar. All right. So some of these, your big soundstage has a gigantic board, I don't know, like 64 channel board or whatever it is. But then you have the computer right beside it with, everything is digital and it's all. So do these boards still get used? Like these slider boards? I mean, when would you use the manual as opposed to digital?
Well, our studio, Hunt Recording Studio, which I had the privilege of designing and building with some partners, it's really kind of my dream studio. And we could talk about that later if you want. But we really built it as a music studio because it's a fairly good sized scoring stage. We could put a 40-piece orchestra in there. Yeah. And really high, 20 something foot ceilings. The board when we did the string session for your film, we might have had a dozen microphones out in the room, one on this violin section and one on that violin section and one on the viola section and one on the cello section, and then some room mics and some different mics in different places in the room. So those all show up on this analog board with all the channels. That's sort of the front end where the mic pre's and equalizers and levels get adjusted before it goes into what we call the box, or Pro Tools in this case. Before it gets recorded and converted to digital, it has to go through some kind of preamp stage. And so the board is really the front end of that, where the microphones come in and we're able to balance them and record them properly.
So people still use these big boards that are not obsolete.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, and we used it in the Foley sessions too, because we might have a dozen microphones out in the room for Foley, and this mic works really great for this footstep. But in the next scene, we need to have one where the chair's squeaking and we're moving in a chair, or, there's some clothes wrestling. We're going to use that mic. And so the board is sort of the interface into the computer,
right,
that we use. And it happens to be just a really great sounding board that we're fortunate to have. But it definitely gets used more on the front end of things than in the mix, because the mix gets done these days almost completely in the box.
Right. Yeah. And also you have, obviously good quality microphones too to capture all that.
For sure.
Bring it in. Okay. So last question. So let's say somebody wants to go down the road the journey you've taken. What does that journey look like? What should they do? Should they train as a sound engineer, musician? I mean, what's the right way to go?
Ooh, that's a really good question. I have to think about that.
Like you have I worked with some of your team, right? The Foley. So are they looking to become what I call these sound designers, sort of the overall person who manages post-sound?
Yeah, so there are various schools in LA and around the country that have audio engineering degrees. And, hopefully in that classroom environment, you're learning the basics of audio. As technology develops and as home studios proliferate, I've seen a bit of a shift. I've actually worked with the USC film school a little bit, and USC as well. So UCLA and USC. When I'm working with the USC kids, they're all composers who want to know how to sound engineer too, because they almost have to now. They have to record their own music in order to get their demos made, or the budgets are challenging at times, so they can't afford to hire an engineer like me. They got to do it themselves. So to some degree now, I think filmmakers, film students have to learn some basic things about audio and miking and sound editing, and they need to be able to kind of make their own edits in Premiere or Final Cut and things like that, and be able to sort of do some things themselves. And I'm seeing more and more students who might be a composition major, but they're pretty well trained in audio. I'm seeing kind of more universities sort of try to teach their music students a little bit more about audio, and vice versa. And so the classes that I've spoken to with UCLA, it's about half directors and half musicians, composers. And those are really interesting because we get to kind of give a sound engineer. I'm sort of like the middleman between the two.
That makes sense, though. It makes sense that you would have half musicians, half film people, half music people.
It's great. And I think the directors learn a lot because they're hearing from somebody like me saying, hey, directors, you really need to pay attention to this, this, and this.
Right.
And composers, you need to understand where the directors are coming from and pay attention to this, this, and this. And so that kind of conversation, I think, turns out to be pretty valuable for the students.
Nice. Makes sense. Well, Dan, I just want to thank you for, first of all, doing a great job on my movie, obviously.
Sure. It was a pleasure.
You were there that night for that big premiere screening. And it's a funny, Dan, we had this huge premiere screening, like 800 people in this gigantic theater. It was fantastic. And Dan was there and he said, Jeff, I hope you don't mind, but can I speak to the sound guys, not you? I want to make sure this is perfect. And I appreciated that because I didn't know what to ask them. I mean, it was, it was a beautiful theater, but it was a little bit antiquated. I mean, one of these old, 80-year-old theaters. So the sound system, I don't know, was it good? You tell me. To me, it sounded good.
Well, when I found out the premiere was going to be in a concert hall, I immediately went, oh man, we're in trouble. Because I just mixed this in 5.1 surround. So I'm going to have to really review the stereo mix and maybe make some adjustments so that it doesn't sound bad in a big music hall. I was very worried. And so the reason I was worried was because I mixed another film years and years ago when we had a big premiere. And it was actually a silent film. I think it was Lon Chaney, old black and white silent film. And it was nothing but music. We got hired by Turner Classic Movies to score this film. I went to the premiere and all of my colleagues were there. And it was really a celebration of the composer and the music. And so I'm sitting next to, Bruce Broughton and Elmer Bernstein and all these very esteemed music colleagues that I had great respect for. And they started the film and it didn't sound very good. In fact, it sounded kind of bad. And I just spent, 5-6 weeks mixing this film, and it was really uncomfortable.
Right.
And I came to find out that the projectionist had some kind of Dolby setting on that was really mucking up the sound. I thought, I am never going to do this again. Like, I will go in and listen. If I have to get there a day early, I'm going to make sure that if we're going to premiere this film in front of 800 people in San Francisco, it's got to at least sound pretty good. And so luckily it worked out well and it was very successful.
Well, I appreciate that. You were there. You were the first one there and you made sure that guy, turn it on, let me hear it a few times. And so that's great. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you. Thank you for taking care of business for my films and for being a guest on our show. Your insights were very valuable and I appreciate it.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it too. And thanks a lot. And I would love to, do more with you and any of your students. Just give us a call.
Okay. Thanks, Dan.
All right. Thanks, Jeff.
So that's Dan Blessinger. He is just a fantastic sound engineer / sound designer. He really understands how to capture the balance between music, effects, and dialogue. And that really elevates the quality and the entertainment value of a film. Do not take sound for granted. It is so important.